In July 1947, something crashed in the New Mexico desert. The United States military said it was a weather balloon. What they said the day before was very different. In the next 10 minutes, you're going to learn three things. First, exactly what happened in the summer of 1947 based on the earliest eyewitness accounts. Second, why the US military changed their official story not once, but multiple times. And third, what the declassified documents and credible testimonies actually suggest about what was out there on that ranch. This isn't speculation, this is what the record shows. It's early July 1947. A rancher named Mac Brazel is riding out across the J.B. Foster Ranch 75 miles north of Roswell, New Mexico. He finds something he can't explain. Scattered across nearly a mile of grazing land, shredded material unlike anything he'd seen. Thin metallic foil that wouldn't crumple. Beams of something lightweight but rigid. Strange markings along the edges that looked like symbols. Brazel collects samples and drives into the nearby town of Corona. He tells the sheriff. The sheriff calls Roswell Army Airfield. Within hours, officers from the 509th Bomb Group, the only atomic-capable air unit in the world at that time, are dispatched to the site. Let that sink in. The 509th Bomb Group, the most classified, most strategic air unit in the United States military, they weren't sent to collect a weather balloon. On July 8, 1947, the public information officer at Roswell Army Airfield issues a press release. It reads, and I'm quoting directly, "The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday." The word used was disc, not balloon. Disc. That press release goes out over the AP wire and runs in newspapers across the country. Then, within 24 hours, everything changes. Here's where the story gets interesting, and where the inconsistencies stack up fast. General Roger Ramey, commander of the 8th Air Force, calls a press conference at Fort Worth, Texas. He presents the wreckage. He tells reporters it's a Rowan weather balloon with a radar target. Photographers take pictures. The case is closed. Officially. But Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer who personally recovered the debris from the ranch, tells a different story years later. Marcel says the material shown at the Fort Worth press conference was not the material he brought from the ranch. He says he was ordered to pose with substitute debris for the cameras. Marcel wasn't a fringe figure, he was the base intelligence officer for the most elite air unit in the US military. He had no motive to fabricate a story that cost him credibility for the rest of his life. And yet, that's exactly what he did. The military's explanation had shifted once. But it wouldn't stop there. By 1994, the official story would shift again, to Project Mogul, a classified balloon program designed to monitor Soviet nuclear tests. And in 1997, a new Air Force report would introduce crash test dummies as an explanation for body sightings. 2 cover stories in 50 years. That's not clarification, that's damage control. Major Marcel wasn't the only one who saw things that didn't match the official story. There were others, and their accounts are harder to dismiss. Glenn Dennis was a young mortician working for Ballard Funeral Home in Roswell in 1947. He received a call from the Roswell base mortuary officer asking about the availability of small, hermetically sealable caskets and asking how to preserve bodies that had been exposed to desert elements without disturbing the tissue. Dennis drove to the base that evening. He was physically escorted out by military police. A nurse he knew, who he calls only Naomi to protect her identity, later described to him what she had seen: small bodies with large heads, no hair, 4-fingered hands. Shortly after this conversation, Dennis says the nurse was transferred and he never heard from her again. There's also Barney Barnett, a soil engineer who claimed he stumbled across a metallic disc and bodies in the same time window 20 miles from the Foster Ranch, and Lieutenant Walter Haut, the officer who wrote the original flying disc press release. In a sealed affidavit opened only after his death in 2005, who stated he had personally seen the craft and bodies at a hangar on the base. He said the weather balloon explanation was, in his words, a cover story. These aren't people who gain anything from these claims. Marcel died largely ignored. Haut sealed his account until he couldn't be interrogated about it. The pattern isn't attention-seeking, it looks more like people trying, belatedly, to set the record straight. So what does the US government actually say happened? The 1994 explanation, Project Mogul, is worth taking seriously. Let's look at it honestly. Project Mogul was real. It was a classified Air Force program using high-altitude balloons with microphones to detect Soviet nuclear detonations. The balloon trains were large, could cover significant ground when they fell, and the materials were unusual, including radar reflectors made of foil and balsa wood. Could that explain the strange materials Brazel found? Possibly. Some researchers think so. But here's what it doesn't explain. It doesn't explain why the initial press release used the word disk. It doesn't explain why Major Marcel says the debris he photographed in Fort Worth wasn't the debris he recovered. It doesn't explain Glenn Dennis's call about small hermetically sealed caskets. Mogul balloons don't have bodies. And it doesn't explain Lieutenant Haut's posthumous sworn affidavit. The 1997 report, which introduced crash test dummies to explain body sightings, has an even bigger problem. The crash test dummy program didn't begin until 1953, 6 years after Roswell. The Air Force acknowledged this discrepancy and said witnesses must have misremembered the timing. Asking people to accept that multiple unconnected witnesses all misremembered the same events by 6+ years, that's not an explanation. That's asking you to do the work for them. Both official explanations have holes large enough to drive a truck through. That doesn't prove what was out there. But it does prove the explanations we've been given don't hold up to scrutiny. Here's what we actually know, not speculation, not tabloid claims. What the documents say. The FBI sent a teletype on July 8, 1947, the same day as the press release, describing the recovered object as a disc-shaped craft. The teletype was declassified decades later. You can read it. It mentions the item being transported to Wright Field for examination by their experts. In 1994, the General Accounting Office conducted an investigation at the request of New Mexico Congressman Stephen Schiff. They found that outgoing messages from Roswell Army Airfield for the period July 1947 had been destroyed in violation of federal law. The GAO report is public record. The records were gone. We also know that in 1948, a classified government project called Estimate of the Situation, produced by the Air Force's own UFO investigation unit, concluded at one point that the flying saucers being reported were interplanetary. That conclusion was later suppressed by Air Force Chief of Staff Hoyt Vandenberg, who ordered all copies burned. A handful survived. Destroyed records, overwritten press releases, sealed deathbed affidavits, a classified intelligence memo concluding the objects were interplanetary, burned on orders of the Air Force Chief of Staff. You don't need to believe in aliens to recognize that something significant happened in Roswell, and that the government went to extraordinary lengths to make sure you didn't know what it was. Something crashed in New Mexico in July 1947. The U.S. government knows what it was, and they decided, very deliberately, that you shouldn't. If you want to go deeper, the next video covers the declassified Project Blue Book files and what the Air Force actually concluded before they shut the whole program down. That link is right there. Stay curious and keep questioning.